So, unfortunately, I wasn't here for Daniel chapter 2, but I know Rob did a great job in going through that and talking about the statue and the different nations and the sort of the past as well as going forward into the future and what that might all represent and how that might be fulfilled in that. Now, in Daniel 3, this is one of those chapters that again is so well known. We teach it every year pretty much to the children. You know, it goes through the fiery furnace and going through the fiery furnace and what that might be. And when we have that, it kind of becomes often a children's story, doesn't it? It kind of becomes something that we go through as we teach our kids and that kind of thing, and then that sort of just remains in that. But just the reality of this is actually something that took place and happened, and something that not just happened for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but often happens to people today. I mean, in reality, we watched Islamic State burn Christians in cages even today. So this kind of experience is happening still now in some parts of the world, which is a horrible thing. But in it, we see God's hand through their life. And I want to just go a little bit about where we are and sort of the history of things. I kind of like that, so if I bore you, forgive me, but I like that kind of thing. But it starts with, sorry, I'm going to be on and off my glasses. I can't see anything right now, so I'm struggling with that. But in sort of this is the layout, a very brief sort of overview of when things are going on in the Babylonian kingdom. You know, Daniel was taken in 605, Nebuchadnezzar became king in 607, and then 2 years later attacked Jerusalem. And he attacked Jerusalem 3 times, as it says there, first, second, third siege. And the first siege, he took the princes and all the really important people, and then he took Ezekiel and other people, and then the third time destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple and all the rest. And then in 539, Babylon falls to the Medo-Persian Empire, and then Israel was returned after that. And so there's sort of a layout. And the reason I kind of want to give that sort of picture and that overview of it is, you know, here in Daniel 2, or verse 49, Daniel, at the end of this dream, he petitions the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affair of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. And so this probably happened after in 605, 608, or 602, somewhere around in there, 600, somewhere around in that period of time. After their 3 years of training, they began to exercise authority, and then this whole dream took place somewhere in between that and the third siege, and then they became sort of rulers in the kingdom. Daniel sat in the gate, and these other guys took authority and power in different parts of the province of Babylon and had authority and rule, and with that would come prestige and wealth and all of the rest of it. And then Daniel chapter 3 begins to happen. Now, what often is the case is what we've done today in the church, what we've done sort of a disservice, I think, to many of us, is somehow we have sort of made the idea of going through trials as almost sinful, or almost if you're a really good Christian, you would never have to go through trials. You wouldn't have to go through any difficult. You wouldn't have to go through anything hard, because your faith would carry you through, and you would just have roses all day long. It'd be wonderful, you know. And it kind of becomes that. And people look at you going, oh, you're going through a difficult time. There must be sin in your life in somewhere. You know, there's something wrong with that person because they're going through a difficult time. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're one of the few people. These 3 guys, Daniel and Joseph, are really the only 4 that I can think of, main characters of the Old Testament that didn't have something bad said about them, some sort of failure. Some of them are very minor, others are quite large, like David's, but they all had some sort of failure, mostly listed, except for these few guys. And here, you're ruling. God has placed you in that position, and during that time, as you're ruling, the guy that you're actually working for is going over to your homeland and destroying it. And yet you have to rule with authority and with honesty and doing right and all the rest of it, while he's going and killing your countrymen a couple of different times. He does it there in 597. He does it again in 586. Totally destroys the nation. And during all that time, and a lot of commentators will think this particular experience in Daniel chapter 3 sort of took place around 586 or thereabouts. And it's almost as if he does this to sort of thwart God's prophecy of Daniel chapter 2, as well as just this I am king. Now, we were just discussing this earlier about the fact that Nebuchadnezzar says things like, that your God is not able to deliver you, and I'm the best, and all that kind of thing. And he says that, and it's almost like he's just destroyed the nation of Israel, destroyed the temple, and just as Daniel says, you're the golden head, but that's all you are, because your kingdom is going to be taken over by this kingdom, and this kingdom is going to be taken over by this kingdom, and you're not going to last. And so then he goes and he builds this statue. Nebuchadnezzar, verse 1. The king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, its width 6 cubits, so 90 feet by 9 feet. He set it up at the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And he says that like 5 or 6 times, 7 times I think it is, that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, that he had set up, that he had set up. And he says it over and over and again. There they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud to you, it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So, Daniel, he makes this he interprets this dream, he tells them the prophecy, and then years later, we don't know, maybe a couple decades later, he goes and builds this image, and he calls all the guys together and brings them to this place. And it's almost like he's setting this up to say, look at me, I am the greatest. I am the gold statue. Yes, Daniel said I'm the head, but I'm going to make this gold statue to be who I am. Now, one of these things about this whole picture is that the nations at this time, if you won a battle, your God was stronger than the God that you took over. That was the thought. And so then you would begin to worship that other god because they were stronger. Now, you see that in the kings. You read the Kings and Chronicles and things, that's what the kings would do. They would look out and they would say, well, the Philistines, they beat us, so I'm going to worship their gods, and so maybe their gods will help me, and then I'll win back again. And instead of seeking and staying true to the Lord, because there's always something that wants to take us away from that simple faith. There's always something that wants to move us away to get us to look at something else that will help us. And here is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're just minding their own business, minding the affairs that they've been given, doing what they've been told to do. Daniel sitting in the gate, doing what he's supposed to be doing. And then this trial comes upon them. And yet here, through it, Nebuchadnezzar has this idea that he is the greatest. And what he forgets, and he's going to really learn this in the next chapter when he gets sent out to the pasture for a few days, or for a few years, that he is not really all that. And so this whole chapter is really a battle between Nebuchadnezzar and God, really. That's really what this is all about. It's Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are just players in it. They're not really the main characters of this. This is Nebuchadnezzar versus God. And in the midst of that, you have these characters, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel's not even there. We don't know where he is. Not going to really comment too much on that because we don't know where he is. But what we forget is, in Isaiah chapter 47, I was angry with my people. I have profaned my inheritance and given them into your hand. You showed them no mercy. On the elderly you laid your yoke very heavily, and you said, I shall be a lady forever, so that you did not take these things to heart, nor remembered the latter end of them. Now this is written to Babylon. This is written to this very nation. And Nebuchadnezzar was sort of sitting there saying, I am the greatest. I'm going to build this. Everybody's going to come worship it. They're going to see that I am the greatest king. And here's Isaiah writing a couple hundred years before Nebuchadnezzar ever came on the scene, Babylon ever ruled, proclaiming that God was going to allow this to take place in order to discipline his people. That he has profaned the inheritance. I'm angry with my people. Therefore, I'm letting Babylon do what they're going to do, and then there's going to be an end. But because you didn't show mercy, because you made it worse, because you treated them so poorly, I'm going to destroy you. And that's this whole picture here in Isaiah 47. Because Isaiah has many different prophecies about that. He says, but now, thus says the Lord, who created you, O Jacob, and he formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. And when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. Now this, again, was a couple hundred years before this ever took place. So much so that people actually think, or some of the more liberal scholars actually think this is all allegorical, sort of a midrash that is sort of an allegory of this particular teaching. That someone wrote this in order to sort of bring this teaching here in Isaiah into the realm of some kind of story. And so they did this because Isaiah was so clear. And it's because what Isaiah says here, well, it can't actually be prophecy because that would mean there's a God and that would mean there's truth and there's all that. And we can't do that. So it's got to be some story written in later on. But here, again, 8th century, 6th century, you have this... these guys actually going through it. And when I say that, the battle is actually between Nebuchadnezzar and God. These guys are just players in it. And I like that because that's what we are, aren't we? It really is not about us. And I think, I don't know what happens, but it really becomes about me. Life becomes about me. What I like to do, where I like to go, what I like to feel, how I like to experience, and it becomes that. And often, instead of really about God, I've said this over and over again recently, that our role or our life here is to know God and to make him known. That's what our life is. And here Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are willing to make God known through their life or through their death. They're willing to take that role, to take the role God puts upon them, and in this case, not to bow, in order to bring God the glory that he deserves and should have. Now, even here in the Old Testament, you have Isaiah saying, hey, you're going to walk through the fire. You're not going to be burned. I'm going to be with you. In the New Testament, we have something very similar. Peter says, beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's suffering, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. So here in the Old Testament, Isaiah is saying fiery trials are coming to the nation. Here in the New Testament, he's writing to the church, and he's saying, beloved, do not think it strange that trials come upon you. And yet, when trials come upon me, I think it's strange. Why are you allowing this in my life, God? Why is this happening in this way when it's really about me and my comforts? I'm not comfortable right now, so therefore something's not right with you. Not with me, of course, but with you. And that's this idea that comes along. And what other people say, well, since God would never put you through that, there must be something wrong with you. And all the while, God is actually trying to reveal himself in and through your life. Here he says, look, through the sufferings that are going to happen. Now, he qualifies it. Later on, he says, it's not because you're not suffering because you're just being a jerk or an idiot, but you're suffering because you are doing your work for the Lord. In fact, the beginnings of this chapter 4 in 1 Peter, he says, arm yourself with the mind of Christ and leave the world system. You spent enough of your time living that way, living in the lust of the flesh. Leave that and live for God. But if you live for God, don't be surprised that you go through the fiery trials that are going to come. Because in my mind, I'm serving God now. I shouldn't have. Why? I'm just trying to get right with God. I'm just trying to walk with Him. And all of a sudden, everybody fires things at you. If that's the case, that's the same thing here. All these guys are wanting to do, they're doing their work well. They're successful. They're walking with God. They're wise. They have everything. And all they're not doing is bowing when they're told to bow. But Warren Wiersbe says this about faith. He says, faith means obeying God regardless of the feeling within us, the circumstances around us, or the consequences before us. Now, I like that. Faith is obeying God regardless of feelings, circumstances, or consequences. When we truly trust and believe God, whether I feel like obeying or not, whether I feel like serving or not, whether I feel like if I do this, there's going to be some consequences or circumstances going to try to lead me away. There's always something that wants to somehow stop that fellowship with God. In fact, here Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are faced with their life. And this is something that's gone on through history. In 250 AD, Decius, he did something very similar to this, where he said, everybody has to burn a pinch of incense to me and to my gods. If you don't do that once a year, you just got to burn a pinch of incense once a year to me and to my gods. You're fine. You can worship whoever you want after that. Just do that one thing. In the Middle Ages or during the Catholic times in the 1500s, John Frith, John Hopper, John Rogers, they all were burned at the stake because they said the transubstantiation is not true. That the body and the bread and the wine that they take in communion is not really the body and blood of Christ. Because they said it's not actually changed, because that's what transubstantiation means. It means that it actually, when the priest does his thing, the bread and the wine actually become the body and blood of Christ. You're eating his body, really, not just figuratively. And so they said that is not true, and they were burned at the stake for it. These guys here in the first century lost their life because they said, I'm not burning that incense. And wouldn't it just be so easy to do? I mean, Lord, you know what I'm thinking. I'm really not doing this, and then and it's so easy to just say, I'm just going to pass on that. And many Christians did. It caused all kinds of trouble because many Christians were not willing to risk their life. Not really willing to walk in that way. And here's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego facing that same circumstance here. What are they going to do? If they bow down for this one moment and got up again and served God the rest of their life, nobody's really going to care. And in our day and age, there's we have such an easy thing to I guess it's, almost accepted that we would do these kinds of things and make excuses why. But not these guys. These guys press into the Lord all the more. And he says, whoever does not fall down and worship will be cast immediately in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Verse 7. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all the kinds of music, all the people, nations, languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. I mean, can you imagine that? You're standing there, and all of the people, these are not just the common people. This was a celebration at the inauguration of this statue. So all the leaders, all the rulers, all the generals, all the powerful people are there, and they're going to lead the way, and then later on the other people are going to come in. And you're standing amongst them, and you're standing there, and there's the queen, and then you've got all the prime minister and the cabinet, and they're all bowing down, and you're standing there not willing to do that. And all you have to do is bow for a few seconds and get up again. You can make every excuse why that would be okay, yet these guys didn't. They gave God an opportunity to work in their life, and I love that. They gave God an opportunity to be obedient to Him, that God would be able to work. What would have happened if they would have bowed? I don't know. Thank the Lord we don't have to ever find that out, because they were not willing to do that. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. These guys came forward and they began to accuse the Jews. Now we know what this was about. Daniel had this happen later on when he gets thrown into the lion's den, that they were jealous. They wanted their authority. They wanted their position. These Jews, we had just destroyed their temple. We've just destroyed their nation, and now they're ruling over us? This is not right. Let's do something. So they go in before the king in order to say this. They spoke to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. O king, you have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of these instruments with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. Now, and whoever does not fall down to worship shall be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, I want to pause here for just a second, total aside. But in this list of instruments, you have a few of Greek terms used for these instruments. And because of that, there are the liberal scholars that will come in and say, this was not written by Daniel at all. It was written by a later guy during the Greek period. And they say that because Daniel is so specific about the Greeks. And there's no way he could have known that beforehand. And so it had to have been written after the fact. And it's proof because some of these words are Greek, which is laughable because there's only a few of them. In all of the Daniel, there's only a few words that are Greek, which just shows that the Greeks were moving through. They had mercenaries. They would go fight battles all over the place. They would take their musical instruments with them. This is really the only place. And all the names of the different people or the magistrates, officials, province, none of that's Greek. And there's no other Greek anywhere else. So it actually shows the opposite of it because there's a lack of Greek throughout. If it really was written during the Greek period, it would be filled with Greek terms. Instead, there's only a few listed that would be easily carried, a horn or a flute, from one place to another, which I think is an amazing thing because there's so much about this, about Daniel, that is so specific and can be tested in so many places that we can know that this is truly the Word of God. But here he goes, he says, and there are certain Jews, verse 12, whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, these men, O king, who have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. So you find this a couple of times. Nebuchadnezzar. Well, you found it in the last chapter. He was angry because they wouldn't tell him his dream. Now he's in this rage and fury. And later on, you find full of fury in verse 19. This guy was constantly just flying off the handle and just doing all these things. Now, they did some excavation in Babylon recently, and they actually found a mural with the painting of Nebuchadnezzar on it. And this is like the only one in history of this old that you can actually see what he looked like. And this was him. Now, if you've never seen Inside Out, you won't know what that's about. But if you've seen Inside Out, you know exactly what we watched it last night. It made me laugh because we're talking about this. But it's amazing how anger will make you do things that are just ridiculous, aren't we? You know, Ecclesiastes, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for angry rests in the bosom of fools. I mean, the idea there is that you're looking for reasons to be angry. You're looking for reason to get worked up for one way or another. And I don't know, that we get into a pattern of that. And you almost feel like you have to be angry all the time or upset all the time. And he's like, don't do that. This is Solomon saying it. He says it again in Proverbs, something different. He says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. So here's Nebuchadnezzar taking all these cities, and yet he can't even control himself. He can't even control his rage. He does this horrible thing. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were some of the three wisest men in his kingdom. They had already proven themselves with Daniel as well. They'd already gone through this. And so now as they're facing this, another sort of temper tantrum that Nebuchadnezzar gets into, they're facing this very thing. Now, as he come to this place where they're faced with it, we often don't like to do all the work to get up to that place, you know. I just want to be really mature. I just want to be really great for God. I want to be this whatever, you put it there. But God has you take a step here, and then a step here, and then a step here, and then you become who God wants you to be. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, well, they've already gone through that, haven't they? They've already gone through some of the trials. They've already taken the lesser trial. What was that? Well, they didn't eat the king's delicacy, didn't they? And they didn't eat the king's delicacy. They lived for God at that time, a very minor trial. I'm sure it was massive in the moment, because if they didn't look very good in 10 days, they could be destroyed. You know, and all they would have to do is start eating meat again, and they'd be fine. But there was this worry, you know. it wasn't totally legitimate, but there was some worry there, and they overcame that small trial. That now they saw how God, if they really put God first in their life back on this small trial, that when they get to the big trial, where they're going to stand before the king and not bow, they're ready for it. Now I love that God wants to prepare us, and he wants to take us through our lives so that we constantly are being grown and strengthened. Now, what happens is we come through one trial and we think, that was the worst one I've ever been through. Woo, I'm all right now. That had to be the worst. Well, if you've been a Christian very long, you know the next trial is probably a little bit more difficult because God's strengthening you a little bit more difficult because he wants you to have a greater witness, a greater impact. And here, not only was there a couple of guys back in Daniel 1 who saw it, now you have the whole empire, people from every part of the empire. Isn't that an amazing thought? How God brought all of these guys together. They're all looking at him. They're from everywhere in the nation. Now, they're probably sitting there looking around going, wow, there's a bit of nervousness. It doesn't look like it, actually. They're quite strong in what they say. But God brings these guys together for a reason, doesn't he? Just like when the Spirit comes upon him in the book of Acts. You had people from all over the empire, Roman Empire, all there to see this great work of God, to get saved at that moment, to take that gospel back to where they're from. Here you have the same thing. You have all the empire there in one spot for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to stand up and to be counted and proclaim the name of God, so that Nebuchadnezzar is going to do what he does. But he's in this rage. He's ready to destroy them. And he says, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They obviously had some sort of good position because he gives them another chance. He doesn't give a lot of the guys very much chance, but in other times. But he gave these guys a chance, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I've set up. 15. Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of these instruments, you will fall down and worship the image which I have made. Good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? That's the question, isn't it? Who is this God who will deliver you? And this is that sort of goes right into this idea that it's almost as if he's shaking his fist at the king, the God of Daniel. I'm just the golden head. Oh, no. I'm the full gold. I'm all that, you know. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, standing before a king who could kill them at any moment. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. In that, if that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And I mean, these two verses are repeated so much, aren't they? You know, in verse 16, he just says, you know what, we don't have to worry about how we're going to answer. We don't have to worry about what you're going to say. We are going to serve God. Now, the whole reason they're in Babylon, the whole reason they're there is because of idolatry. And they didn't keep their Sabbaths. But it's the idolatry that led the nation to be destroyed in such a horrible way. And Manasseh and all that he did and different kings before him. And so here these guys are facing the very thing that put them in this captivity in the first place. And the very first sort of chance they have, how are they going to respond to it? You wonder if this story didn't have such an incredible impact on the Jews of captivity that they never again really went into idolatry. You wonder if this is part of that sort of that burning of this account or this belief that they never went back into it. We don't know that, but it definitely happened. They were there, they saw it, they heard about it, and they did not bow. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able. Now that's the first thought, isn't it? That our God is able to deliver us. We just sang about it, didn't we? He is able to deliver us. He has the power to do that. Yes, the king is standing there in front. The furnace is right over here. The soldiers are right there, ready to grab them at any point. But God can deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand. I love that. I love the fact that he will deliver us from the fiery furnace. He doesn't say that. He'll deliver us from your hand. And that understanding, that bedrock of belief, that we have a heaven to look forward to, and God is going to deliver us. Whether it's through death or through life, he delivers us. And there's nothing to fear. Now, I say that because in verse 18, he goes, even if he doesn't, if not, let it be known, we're still not going to bow. We're not going to serve your gods. We're not going to worship the golden image which you've set up. We are not going to do this, even if it costs us our life. Even if it costs us our life. We're not going to bow. Now, as he speaks about this, and as they're standing there doing this very thing, Nebuchadnezzar is just enraged. It says there in verse 19, he is full of fury. But these guys are willing to stand up and say that. Now, as we compare the different times throughout history, I like the story that, as you know, that God was with him in the trial. God led them through. Nothing happened to them. We'll get to that in a minute. And it was an amazing thing. Other times, Jehoshaphat's the one I really like, where you're going out to war, you're singing, and God just does it before you even get there. You don't have to do anything. You just start singing, praising, the army goes, the choir goes, the enemy's destroyed, and you just get to go and pick up the loot. It's great, But there's other guys that didn't quite happen to, What about Peter and the disciples who preached and then got beaten up? What did they do? Well, they praised God because through it they got to suffer. Or Peter that was arrested and thrown in prison. And then God delivered him while he was in prison, just before he was going to be brought out to killed. But what about James? And what about Stephen? And what about other people, even today, that are being killed for the faith? So God doesn't always deliver us in a sense that we might want him to do. He doesn't always save in this particular way. As I've already mentioned, the Islamic State have burned Christians alive. They killed those Ethiopian Christians. And those people that you can watch the video, which obviously I have not, and I'm sure most of us, or very few of us, have ever watched that video. You can watch them be slaughtered. And these are Christians who proclaimed Christ right as they were being killed. And they were killed. But that goes back to this idea that he will deliver us from your hand. You see, really, our life is to know God and to make him known. That's our goal. Our goal is nothing else than that. And when that is truly the bedrock of our life, that is truly what we believe, then that is how we will live our life. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whether they delivered from it, through it, or by it, that any of them, that they will stay true to their faith in God, and we will do the same if we have that same bedrock. And Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, he commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. I think it was Walvoord talked about how that was, this guy not making very much sense. If he really wanted to torture them, he'd actually lower the temperature, and I think they would be tortured a bit more. But no, he makes it hotter in order to sort of destroy them almost so fast. And he commanded, therefore, certain mighty men of valor who were of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their trousers and their turbans and their other garments and were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, the furnace exceedingly hot, the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Here these guys are. They don't strip them of their clothes. They have all their clothes on. They're going to just toss them in. Everything about this says that they should be just destroyed immediately. Even the very men. And what I think about that, it's so challenging. These men were willing to give their life for Nebuchadnezzar. Not give their life for God, but they gave their life for something, Nebuchadnezzar. That's what they gave their life for. And when you look at your life, we all give our life for something, don't we? We all give our life for something, whether it's money or power or whatever. We all give our life for something. Here these guys are going, they're mighty men of valor. They're some of the strongest men, and they're willing to sacrifice their life to carry out the king's commands. And who is he? If it wasn't for the Bible, nobody would even know who Nebuchadnezzar is. There'd be a few scholars, in libraries who might know who he is, but the vast majority of the population would have no idea who Nebuchadnezzar is. But for the Bible, but for the fact that he interacted with these wonderful men that we're studying today. And he shook his hand at God, and God was so gracious to him. But these are the people they gave their life to. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, well, they're willing to give their life for God. And what will we give our life for? What are we going to spend our life on? What is going to be the end of my life? I have this other job, and it's a company called CathTip, and we do work with catheters. Long story, don't really want to go into it. But there's this one guy that when I go to these trade shows and stuff, I see him regularly. As I walk up to him, the first thing he says, "Oh, the catheter man," because that's what we're doing. We produce catheters. And so, he's joking, and we've actually had some good discussions. I've shared the gospel with him and all the rest. But that's how he treats me as, the catheter man, because that's who I am, CathTip, right there. And that's my story. That's who he sees me as. And you look at that, and I laugh at it, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to be known as that, What do yes, I have a job to do, but I want to be known as a Christian. I want to be known as Christ-like. I want to be known as someone who loves Jesus. And that's what we want to be known as. That's how we want our testimony. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, well, they're going to be known. They were already known by many, but they're going to be known by all to be men who of the Most High God. That's who they're going to be known by the end of this story. And it's only through going through these very experiences that testimony can come forth. We can say we're Christians all we want, but it's only when we often will go through these difficult, trying times that truly our Christian character can come through, that truly people can see their God be different than mine, because they handle that situation completely different than I would handle that situation, because they have somebody greater. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go through the flames. These other guys, they can't even make it close to the flames, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown down into it. Verse 23, bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O God, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. They are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." And Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego came out from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, the administrators, all these different guys, all from all different parts of the kingdom, they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. It wasn't just for the king, though it was, but all the major rulers and people of authority in the kingdom got to see how powerful and wonderful God was to his servants who would trust him. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him." I love this part, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't even say anything. They've already said all they needed to say. They said, we're not going to bow, we're going to serve God. We're going to love God. They go through the furnace, they go through the trial, and their testimony speaks for itself. And now Nebuchadnezzar's like, you serve a great God. You delivered your servants, trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word. And I love that, who have trusted in him and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any God except their own God. That is, he knows what this really means. That they were willing to say, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to serve Jesus with all my heart. He is the one I'm going to offer my life to. He's the one I'm going to yield my body to. He's the one I'm going to yield my very life to. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nations, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap. Because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Now, he didn't quite get it, but, he did learn quite a bit. In the next chapter, he fully gets it. But all through this, you see how God, even though he's the tool, even though that he's destroying the nation and the rod of punishment, God still is reaching out to this guy. Still trying to draw him close. Still trying to reveal himself to him. Because there is no other God who can deliver like this. This whole battle is that as Nebuchadnezzar was saying, my gods are better than you, Israel. They took you out. God was like, let me just show you something here. No, that's not the case. But you are just a tool that I'm using for discipline of my people. There is no other God who can deliver like this. I want to read a couple things again from Isaiah. Because I think in our day and age, we've got to continually remind ourselves of these things. Isaiah 44, thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. And who can proclaim as I do? Then let him declare it and set it in order for me. He challenges all these other gods, like Elijah does. He challenges them. Can you declare things before they happen? Can you speak prophetically? Speak prophetically then. Declare it. Since I appointed the ancient people, and the things that are coming shall come, let them show these to them. Do not fear, nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. The nation of Israel, you are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. That they are the witnesses to the everlasting one God. Again, very quickly, Isaiah 45, I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to the setting that there is none besides me. The nation of Israel, and the fact that he had chosen them, was the testimony. That he had taken them from slavery, planted them in the land, and that everyone could see that they were the light set on a hill, that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, there is no other. I form the light, create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things. He says, I am the Lord. There is no other God. Now, people can say, and they can disagree with that all they want. Or they can disagree with what the Bible says. But nobody can say with honesty that the Bible would actually say there are other gods. That's two places. There's about 50 places that it talks about this very thing. That there is one God, and he is revealed. In fact, in the New Testament, it doesn't even allow many different revelations of the one God, because it says in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son, Jesus. So it actually brings it back down to one path, Jesus, as well as one God, the triune Godhead that we know. And so here he's trying to reveal this to Nebuchadnezzar all this time, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. You know, as we finish, I want to stop for just a second, and we sang that song, Deliverer, that because there's no other God who can deliver like this. When you're in that situation, now, I doubt any of us are going to be in the situation that there's a furnace, I'm going to get thrown into it, what am I going to do? But there are many times where I'm going through a trial where it seems to think or say that God's not with me, that I've got to do something else. I've got to get out of this. I've got to go over here. I've got to bow my knee. I've got to go over there. I've got to trust in that. I've got to find some other means than simply trusting in the Lord in that sense. And he says, hey, you know what? There is no other God who can deliver like this. James and Stephen, there they are. They're facing death. And they're like, there is no other God. Stephen being stoned, prays for the very people that are witnessing. Here, John Frith, these two different guys, John Hooper and John Rogers, they were burned at the stake. They were burned in their very location where they ministered. And the point was that we'll burn them in their area, in their parish, and that will scare everybody. Because if you follow these guys' doctrine, this is what's going to happen to you. But actually, the reality was they died in such a way that it actually spread their faith even more. That people began to realize they've got something that we want. It did the exact opposite of what they wanted. Because these men, here in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, we find it today, that Egyptian man that was able to proclaim Christ, he's like, the brother thanked in Islamic State that he would allow his brother to proclaim Christ before they cut off his head. I mean, that kind of thinking just blows you away, that these guys are willing to sacrifice in that way because they know there's something more. They know that there is a God who is the deliverer. There is no other God who can deliver like this. None. None at all. And now through this moment, they're able to see that through the fiery trial, and to think that possibly God is allowing this to happen in my life so that someone else is looking on, and they are the ones that God is actually trying to reach. You are the person going through it. You're the soldier, if you will. You're the one going into battle. But God is using your life in such a way, maybe not even speaking, but just the way you're handling it, that the satraps, the governors, all of those looking, the king, whoever it is looking on and thinking, this is what's going to break their faith. This is what's going to destroy them. They're going to turn here, and then they see you not turn. They see you still praise God. They see you still walking with Him when you're going through this, whatever situation that you're in. That is what people then will say, you know what? There is no other God like their God. So, Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for this story